זמר של שחרחורתי קראוני צחייני ומילת שמש קיץ דלי שחורי שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמרת ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת יקראוני כל יורדי אם על פעם יקראוני שוב אליך שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמרת ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת בין לאחרון אם עוד פעם יקרה שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמרת ליבי כולו שחרחורת יקראוני צחייני ומילת שמש קיץ דלי שחורי שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמרת ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת יקראוני כל יורדי אם עוד פעם יקראוני שוב אליך שחרחורת יפייפית כל כך בעינייך אש בוערת ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת
זה עוד יום שישי, נושם את האוויר, האור והצל משחקים שוב תופסת. השולחן ערוך, תמונות ילדות על הקיר, שיירות לבנות חוזרות מבית כנסת, והריח הזה ששורט לי את הלב.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שם.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. This is Hakham Melech Rahmiel of the World Alliance of Qara'im, and we are here on today's Shabbat Torah study. I'm broadcasting to you from the beautiful Golan Heights in Israel. which is where I live. I did some beautiful hikes this week with a good friend who is also a member of the local chapter of the World Alliance of Qara'im. That's right, we've started a local chapter here in Katsrin. We're building a community. As I tell everybody each week, that is our goal. And we've already started to build the community. We have a number of members in the community. We are beginning to have weekly meetings. We're going to have a weekly meeting. Our next weekly meeting is going to be this Thursday here. And the goal is to build up a community, eventually get a patch of land for ourselves, and to live as a Karaite community here in the Golan Heights. Or perhaps if Israel expands its territories, somewhere in the Lebanon or out in Syria. But we won't go in that direction right now. For now, we're going to be here in the Golan Heights. I want to welcome a couple close friends. Our friend Suri. Welcome back, Suri. And hope you're feeling well. And other regular friends who join us. So we finally made it through chapter 23 of Leviticus. Yes, we actually started it last January of 2025. And then if you remember, I went back to the United States for a while and I took a break from the Shabbat studies. And then when I came back and resumed the Shabbat studies, we continued. Did I say Leviticus 25? No, I said January 2025. We continued the Shabbat studies. We went back to Leviticus 23. We finally completed it last week. So this week we're going to dive into Leviticus chapter 24, finally, moving forward. Not that 23 isn't a good one. It's an oldie but a goodie. So let's see. What do we want to talk about today? I guess what is on my mind today is an issue of, I think that every one of us relates to, and that is difficult times that we go through in life, pain and suffering, which we all hate. We don't like to go through it, but there's a value to it. It makes us into better people. I don't even like to say it that way. It makes us into the next version of ourselves. So there's I don't know, let's pick a name, Joe. There's a Joe version 1.0. And then this Joe goes through some issues or some challenges in his life, and then he learns something about himself, or he becomes more aware of himself, of his surroundings, more empathetic towards other people, and he becomes Joe version 2.0. And then something else happens, or another series of events happens, and he becomes Joe version 3.0. And this is the way we essentially, if we are searching for the truth, then Yahweh helps us out and actually gives us some difficult times, because he knows that this is the way that we can grow as ourselves and turn into the next version of ourselves. So whatever versions we're up to, I don't know what version I'm up to, 6.0, 7.0, 12.0, who knows, right? But all I know is that all of the difficult times, all the challenges, all the pain and suffering that I've gone through in my life has actually been a gift from Yahweh, because it's made me turn into or become the next version of myself, which is really moving towards a direction that I was always meant to be. As I always like to say, life is a process of self-discovery. When we're babies, when we're children, we really don't know ourselves at all. We're just all potential, but we haven't fulfilled at that point any of that potential. We're a bundle of joy, and our parents have great hopes for us, but now the hard work starts, and that's what life is all about. And as we go through life, hopefully, if we search towards the truth, if we row, if we paddle in the direction of truth, then Yahweh helps us out and shows us in stages the truth, the light. He can't show us the truth all at once, because it would be too much for us. It's kind of like building up in any skill or any sport. If you just are starting karate or martial arts and you go up against a black belt, you're going to get your ass kicked. So Yahweh knows that he can't reveal to us immediately, or he can't let us find immediately who we are. So he does it to us in stages. He makes us go through certain things, and then we arrive at one stage, at one stopover point. And then we stay at that stage for a while, and then we have to go through something else, and then we get to the next stage, and so on and so forth. So life is a series of self-revelation, of knowing who we are, or actually becoming who we were always destined to be. So we each have a certain destiny. We each have a certain, shall we say, ultimate idea or ultimate destiny of who we're meant to be. And if Yahweh is favorable towards us, if he favors us, if he sees that we're serious and he sees that we're trying to go in the right path, then he will help us reach that destiny. And that can only come over time, and that can only come through challenges, trials, tribulations, pain, and suffering. There is no other way that it can come. If the mountain was just a smooth road with no height, then it wouldn't be a mountain, right? We are climbing the mountain up to the top. And we see this also in the Torah. We see this also in the Tanakh with the great figures of the Torah. So an example might be Abraham. Abraham, as a young man, didn't know who he was. He just thought he was another inhabitant of Ur, of the city of Ur. Maybe he was even a polytheist or an idol worshiper growing up as a little child, as probably his parents were. And he didn't know who he was. It was only through a series of journeys, through a series of self-revelations, through pain and suffering, that he knew who he was. So Abraham had to go through a lot. He had to leave his home. He had to journey with his father to Haran. He had to go. Sorry, I was just reading a comment. He had to go with his father to Haran, to the city of Haran, in the region of Padan Aram, in the area of Aram Naharaim. And then he had to leave his family. He had to leave his father and go on a journey to a place that he had never been before and didn't know anything about. When Yahweh told him to go to the land of Israel. No sound or face. Hold on a second. Let's see what's going on here. You don't hear me? Suri? I don't understand what's going on. One second. I'm confused. I don't know what this is here. Okay, let's just make sure technically we're good at the moment. Let me go check it out on YouTube. Just give me a second. Let me see what's going on. I'm sorry about that. Let me see what's going on. Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. No, I think we're okay. I think we're okay. I have it here. And I'll just leave it up to monitor it. Let me just test one more time. Okay. Okay, I think we should be okay. So, all right, let's hope everything is okay. So Abraham had to go through a series of trials and tribulations. He had to leave his father's house, and he had to go to a place he'd never been before, to the land of Canaan. And then he had to go through a whole bunch of trials and tribulations. He had a wife who was barren. He didn't have any children at all. I'm sure he had to watch his other friends have children and families and eventually grandchildren, and he had nothing. And eventually he was promised, or eventually he then had a son with Hagar, with his concubine, or with his wife's maidservant. And he was already much older at that time. And then he got promised, or he was promised that he would have this was actually before that he was promised that he would have a son. That's in Genesis chapter 15. But then he was eventually promised that he would have a son with Sarah, that Sarah would give birth, and she did give birth. And then he eventually was told to sacrifice the son that he had given birth to. So Abraham went through a lot. And through all of these trials and tribulations, he went through a series of self-revelations. He went through a series of stages where he discovered himself more and more, where he became himself. And this is the path of a righteous person. This is a path of someone who is dedicated to Yahweh and who decides to follow in the way of Yahweh. Ultimately, he was even given another name. His name was changed by God from Avram to Abraham. I'm not sure why, sorry. Everything seems fine on my end. I'm just going to check again. Let's see what's going on here. Let's try this one more time. Just give me a second, please. Everything seems okay on my end, sorry. So I'm not sure exactly what you're seeing. Okay. So maybe it's something on your end. Okay. Or maybe we're having some internet problems here. That happens sometimes. There's not much that I can do about it. That's just the way it is. At any rate, so Avram had to go through a series of trials and tribulations whereby he was able to reveal over time who he was. He was able to reach his destiny. He was able essentially to unveil himself layer by layer, almost like stripping off like layers of clothing until he gets down to the essence of who he was. And really this culminated in the sacrifice, or the almost sacrifice of his son Isaac. After that was essentially the end of all of his major tests in life. He had essentially reached his destiny at that point. I'm sure he continued to grow, but that was the last major trial or tribulation that he had. And so that is really ultimately what life is about. So if we are following in the path of Yahweh, I would say the more we are following in the path of Yahweh, the more trials and tribulations we're going to have, the more difficult times we're going to have in life, the more we're going to get knocked down, we're going to get punched down, and hopefully get up again. But the more we're going to learn about ourselves, the more we're going to reveal about ourselves, so that by the time we get to the day of our death, then we will have reached the pinnacle of our existence on this earth. We will have learned all of the lessons we were supposed to and could have learned in this lifetime. And hopefully, learning some of those lessons, we'll be able to pass that on to others. We'll be able to teach that to our children, to students, to the people around us. So just a couple of things. One of my favorite internet gurus, I have a bunch of internet gurus, but one of my favorites is Eckhart Tolle. I'm sure you guys have heard of him or may have heard of him. And he always says, when he talks about people who are in pain and suffering, he always says, life is not here to make you happy, it's here to make you conscious. And I love that statement. It's very true. God's job is not to just make us happy, to give us gifts, to give us whatever we want. It's to refine us, like turn us into fine gold, as is the the allegory or the analogy that's used often in the Tanakh, to refine us, to get out all of the impurities and refine us into fine gold or into fine silver. And the only way that can be done, not that I'm a metallurgist, but the only way that can be done, the only way you could take inferior gold and turn it into fine gold is to put it through the fire, right? It has to be put through a very hot fire, it has to be essentially melted and purified in order to turn into fine gold. And that's what Yahweh does to those that he loves, and those that he loves are those that love him. And therefore, if we just remember Eckhart Tolle's statement, life is not here to make us happy, it's here to make us conscious, then that puts a lot of perspective on things. It puts a lot of perspective on the trials and tribulations, that the pain and suffering that we have to go through in life. Each one of them is meant to be a lesson. Each one of them is meant to take us from a previous stage of who we were, to the next stage of who we're meant to be. And this process continues on throughout our lives. And I always say, another analogy that I always like to give is, again, the martial arts analogy, which is that if you want just a simple, like an introductory belt in martial arts, like a white belt or something like that, or the lowest belt, then okay, you have to work a certain amount. But if you want to become a black belt, you're really going to have to get knocked down a lot. You're going to have to get your ass kicked again and again and again, and it's going to hurt, and it's going to suck. But there's no other way to get to the stage of being a black belt without getting knocked down, without getting your ass pummeled many, many times. Maybe you'll even be, knocked out for, I don't mean literally knocked out, maybe even that, but maybe you'll be, injured and have to sit out for a week. Your leg will hurt. You'll be Charlie horse. You'll have a bruise here. But it's all for a reason. It's not that the sensei, the karate teacher, is trying to hurt us or the person who's learning karate or martial arts. He's trying to help the person. And he knows that the only way he can help the person, that he can get him to be a black belt, is through lots of trials and tribulations, lots of pain and suffering, and through that and through all those trials and tribulations, through all that pain and suffering, through all that ass kicking, all those ass kickings, and getting knocked down again and again, then the person becomes better and better at his or her skill. And that also happens, like I was saying before, we increase in levels, right? We become different versions of ourselves, version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and so on. And I think that martial arts is the perfect analogy there, because it's not linear, right? You reach a certain belt, a certain color belt, and then the next belt, and then the next belt, and so on and so forth. So you're constantly reaching the next level, almost like in a video game, although I hate video games. I think they're a giant waste of time. And I don't play video games, even though I did. Not that much, but when I was a kid, old arcade games like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and stuff like that. At any rate, so that is my message for today. My message for today is to understand what the essence of life is, and that life is here to make us conscious, not here to make us happy. It's here to make us conscious. Through our trials and tribulations, through all of the pain and suffering and trials and tribulations that we go through, we are able to undergo a process of self-revelation. We're able to understand and know ourselves more and more. We're able to rise from level to level, from one version of ourselves to the next version of ourselves, and the next version of ourselves. Well, we may be older, but we're wiser, and I would say generally happier. I know for myself, that is definitely the case. I am much happier now than I was, say, in my teens and 20s and even 30s and even 40s. And I'm much more aware of myself. I'm much more knowledgeable of myself and who I am and who I'm not, and what my role is in this life and what my role is not in this life, than I ever was when I was, say, in my 20s, and certainly in my teens or younger, right? So there's a process, and that can only happen through difficult trials, difficult tribulations, lots of challenges, lots of getting knocked down, lots of what we see at the time as pain and suffering. So that's my message for today. Stick to the path. Go in the direction of Yahweh. if you're searching for the truth about your life, the truth about who you are and who you're meant to be, who you're destined to be, the truth about this world, the truth as much as we can perceive it about Yahweh, then it's going to be a very difficult path. Sometimes I like to call it the lonely path of truth. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a very rewarding path. It's certainly better than taking the easy path, and it's certainly better than taking the easy path and not really achieving much in life. I could have, in my own life, taken the easy path. I was given a certain path, which would have led me, probably, who knows what life holds, but I was given and put on a certain path, which would have put a silver spoon in my mouth. It's typical American dream kind of thing, going to a well-known fancy school and then being able to get a good job in New York City. And I won't go into all the details, but if I had stuck to that path, which I didn't, I got out of it literally after 1 year. I couldn't stand it. Well, I'll go into a little bit of it. I'll tell one very quick, interesting story. So after I got out of college, I'll leave the college unnamed, it doesn't matter, but a very well-known fancy college kind of thing. I applied for jobs on Wall Street. This was in the early 90s, not because I had any affinity towards Wall Street, but that's what everyone else was doing, and I had no idea who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. And I went to a job interview with a bank. I won't mention the name of the bank right now. I'll mention it in a couple of minutes. And I was given a job offer, and I was one of only 2 students at my fancy school in my graduating class to be given an offer at this very exclusive bank. And I remember exactly what they told me. They told me that if you accept this offer, when we hire somebody, we hire for life, and you will eventually become a partner in this bank, and you will be making $10 million a year. I remember specifically that's what they told me. And this was back in 1990. So that was a lot of money back then, as it is even now, although much less with the decline of the dollar. And I went and contemplated it and thought about it, and I said no. I went back to them. I said no, I'm not interested. This was even before I believed in God. I grew up not believing in God. It was only through a series of pain and suffering, of trials and tribulations, that I even got to the point where I realized that God existed. So this was before that. It was right around the time where I was considering these things. So I had the sense of, this is not right for my destiny. I didn't know why, but I just knew that this was not right for my destiny. At any rate, then I went my own path. I did end up working on Wall Street for 1 year. I worked for JP Morgan, doing computer programming on the foreign exchange trading floor for JP Morgan, doing computer programming for the foreign exchange traders, basically building their trading systems. After about a year, there's a lot more to the story, but I'll just give the very short version. After a year, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to get out of there. I just couldn't stand it. It was the most empty, depressing place I'd ever been in my entire life, and I quit. And then a bunch of other things happened. Eventually, I made my way to Israel. That's also a long story. And eventually, I was publishing the newspaper Your Jerusalem in Jerusalem, which I did for a number of years. Still online, yourjerusalem.org. You can go check it out. And one of the articles, so I had an assistant editor working for me, I should say working with me, because she was wonderful, at Your Jerusalem. And we did an article on a certain bank in the United States that had bankrolled the Nazis during World War II. And it turned out that the main bank that had bankrolled the Nazis during World War II from the United States of America was this very bank that I had been offered this lifetime position at and had declined it. The name of the bank was Brown Brothers Harriman. And they were known as the Nazi bank, or the bank that bankrolled the Nazis in the United States. So what was my original point? I forgot. I think my original point was that, yes, it might be easy to take the easy road, the road that's laid out before you, the smooth road. I was saying, right, in my life, I certainly had opportunities to do that, and I'm sure many other of you out there did as well. And for whatever reason, I decided not to. I decided to take the more difficult road, the lonely path of truth. And I certainly did not get $10 million a year, I can tell you that, in the paths that I chose in my life, far from it. But I'm definitely maybe poorer and wiser, or older, but wiser and happier, that's for sure. So my initial point was that it's the trials and tribulations, it's the difficult choices that we make, it's sticking to our own guns, it's following the path that we know deep down inside us is the right path for us, which is not always the easy path or not always the path that is laid out before us, that allows us to stage by stage reveal to ourselves and to those around us and to the world around us exactly who we are have always been meant to be, what our destiny is, and essentially, again, strip off all of these layers of clothing until we get to the raw, the bare essence of our existence on this earth. So that's my message for today, is to hopefully put people's trials and tribulations, difficult times, in a different perspective. It's certainly not easy when it happens, when the karate student or when the martial arts students gets knocked down by the sensei and has to limp away, for the rest of the day. That doesn't feel good, but that's what turns the student ultimately into the master. That's what turns the white belt or the yellow belt ultimately into the black belt. So again, to sum up with some of these phrases, where life is here not to make us happy, but to make us conscious. And it's only through trials and tribulation, through pain and suffering, that we reach our ultimate destiny of who we are and who we were meant to be in this earth. So that's my message for today. A little bit different from my opening messages, but I'm sick and tired of seeing the same thing, which is basically, the United States of America is falling apart, leave and come to Israel, which is also true, but that's not what I wanted to speak about today. Okay, so that's that. I'll just go through my announcements again. I'm asking everybody who has benefited from the World Alliance of Qara'im over the years, I'm asking a very important and modest sum. If you could please donate on a monthly basis to our Patreon page. I'm asking only about half the page of a typical US cell phone plan, and this is not for me. I'm not gonna put it in my pocket, although as I always say, some of it will be used for good coffee. That's the only thing. That's the only thing I'm gonna be embezzling money for some good coffee. But other than that, so I'm really into coffee. But other than that, this is really designed, and I'm serious here, to we have a lot of plans with the World Alliance of Qara'im. As I said, we've already begun our community here in the Golan Heights in Israel. If you would like to join our community, contact me privately, and I can give you instructions or direction on how to do that. We're setting up a World Alliance of Qara'im or Karaite community here in Israel. We've already begun to set it up. We already have members, so please join us. It's going to be an amazing thing. It'll take a couple of years to grow, but it's going to be an amazing thing. And number two, we have a whole bunch of other plans. I want to set up a learning center. I want to set up a school. We have a whole bunch of plans. So in order to do that, we need to start having a serious budget. As I always mention, I've never taken the monetary side of things as seriously as I should. And now it's time for me to get more serious about it. So please, just put this up. If you've benefited from the World Alliance of Qara'im, if you've benefited from my dedication and hard work to charism and to Torah over the past 25 years, never wavering for a second, you guys know me, then please help out monetarily by going to that website. It's patreon.com/join/Karaite Insights and join up for the silver tier or higher. Okay, so that's it. That's what I have to say about that. And we're going to get into our Torah study. And we're going to start this Torah study with, so I really like the idea that we're doing some Tanach now. We're not just doing the Torah only, but we're doing the rest of the Tanakh as well. So we finished last week the book of Malachi, which is the last book in the canon of not the Tanakh, that's an incorrect statement, in the canon of the prophets, of the Nevi'im. and we're going to work our way backwards. So the book before it is Zechariah. So we're going to start learning the book of Zechariah. But before we do that, we're going to do a little bit more Karaite history, and we're going to talk about Anan ben David, who is the nominal founder of Karaism, meaning in name, he's the founder of Karaism. But as we'll see, he never called his followers were never called Karaites. They were called Ananites. But he was the first very well known in his area, first person who established a well known movement that was in opposition to the rabbinical movement of his place and of his time. So we're going to learn a bit about him, and then we're going to get into the book of Zechariah, and then we're going to get into Leviticus chapter 24. So we'll take a little break now for about under 5 minutes, and we'll see you back in a couple minutes with with the Karaite history series on Anan ben David. So see you all back here in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to put some music on. Just give me a second to set it up. I'll get some music going.
Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Cuando el rey Nimrod al campo salía, vino en el cielo y en la estrellería, miré todo santa en la llorería, que había de nacer Abraham vino. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
La mujer de Terra enana, día, ella preguntaba, ¿qué tiene la cara tan demonada? Ella ya sabía el bien que tenía.
Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Al fin los 9 meses pariquería, iba caminando por campos en viñas, y a su marido no le descubría, topó Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham Avino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים.
Okay, let's see what's going on here. There we go. Okay, all right, we're back, and we're going to learn about Anan ben David. So let me share the screen. We'll go to my favorite rabbi, the only rabbi I truly trust, Rabbi Wikipedia. You guys all know him. I've mentioned him many times before. And yes, he's not perfect, but no rabbi is. But he's better than most of the other rabbis I've met. Let's put it that way. And so let's learn a little bit about Anan ben David. For review purposes, last week we spoke about Abu Isa Isfahani, who was a Jewish messianic figure from the city of Isfahan in central or south central Iran, who gathered together an army of about 10,000 people, mostly Jews, and went to war against the Islamic Caliphate in Iran, against the Islamic rulers in Iran. And the Karaite understanding of that is that he was going against the Islamic ruling class there because they were in line, or they were in cahoots with the rabbis. As the Islamic Empire expanded, the Muslims gave power to the rabbis to rule over the Jews in the expanding Muslim empire. And Abu Isa Isfahani and his followers had never been exposed to rabbinical Judaism before. They were on the outskirts of the empire, and so they went to war against the Islamic, I believe it was technically called the Caliphate, but whatever it was, the rulership, in order to stop this expansion of rabbinical Judaism into that part of Iran, since it had never reached there before. So that's the Karaite understanding of it. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Anan ben David. So who is this Anan ben David? Let's bring him up. Let's consult our favorite rabbi, Rabbi Wikipedia, and see what Rav Wiki has to say. We'll make this a little bit bigger so it's a bit more visible on the screen there. So I must say that what's important about Anan ben David is that and why is this important? It's important to know Karaite history, because if you're a Karaite, if you identify as a Karaite, and I should always say that the secondary name to our particular branch of Karaism, so we have been called by many the Neo-Karaites. I now have a good friend who calls us the Neo-Karaites, because we've even diverged maybe from the Neo-Karaites a bit. But at any rate, the secondary name that I've given to our movement is the Chozrim B'Tanach, those who return to Tanakh. It's a play on the phrase Chozrim B'Tshuvah, which, if you are familiar with Israeli or Jewish society, are people who come back to rabbinical Judaism. Basically, those who find their way back to rabbinical Judaism after having left it, or their parents having left it, or their grandparents having left it. They find their way back to rabbinical Judaism. They call them the Chozrim B'Tshuvah, those who repent, basically, those who find their way back towards repentance or come back. Okay, Teshuvah is usually translated as repentance. It doesn't matter. Anyway, a play on that is the name of our movement. The secondary name of our movement, which is besides Karaism and the World Alliance of Qara'im, is the Chozrim B'Tanach movement. So if you understand Israeli society well, you'll understand that is the cleverness of that phrase, okay? Because it's a play on this other phrase, Chozrim B'Tshuvah, okay? So we're the Chozrim B'Tanach. We're returning to Judaism, but we're not returning to rabbinical Judaism. We're returning to the Tanakh. And that is really the only future for the nation of Israel, in my opinion, just as it was the only true past for the people of Israel. Okay, that being said, so therefore, if you go around and identify as a Karaite, people are going to say all kinds of silly things to you because they don't really know Karaite history. And I can tell you a couple of them. Number one, and I'm sure if you've gone around identifying as a Karaite, you've encountered all of these at one point or another. Number one, they're going to confuse you with the Sadducees. They're going to ask you, oh, do you believe in an afterlife? Because Josephus says that the Sadducees, who were one of the sects from the Second Temple period, right? The two main sects were really the Pharisees and the Sadducees from the mid to late Second Temple period, also the Essenes. But so the first thing you're going to say is, are you a Sadducee? Okay, or do you believe in an afterlife? Because they're going to confuse you with the Sadducees. The next thing they're going to do is ask you if you believe that, or do you sacrifice the Passover sacrifice on Mount Gerizim? Why do they say that? Because they're confusing the Karaites with the Samaritans. The Samaritans do a Passover sacrifice each spring on Mount Gerizim in Samaria, in the Shomron, near Shechem, near Nablus. Okay, so that's another thing they're going to say. The next thing they're going to say to you, I heard that you put tefillin on right between your eyes, and then it makes you blind. You can't see, because that's an old polemic that the rabbis had against the Karaites. And another thing they're going to say is that the founder of your movement, which they probably won't even know the name of, but they're going to say the founder of the Karaite movement only became a Karaite because he was rejected from the job of exilarch. So in spite, he started the Karaite movement. And when they say that, then what they're talking about is the fabricated story about this man, Anan ben David. Anan ben David was never a Karaite in name. His followers were called Ananites, from his first name, Anan. But in retrospect, he was considered the nominal founder of the Karaite movement, and perhaps one of the most famous original Karaites. It's not the most famous original Karaite. And so it's important to know a bit about who he is and where he fits into Karaite history. So that being said, let us dig in and learn a bit about Anan ben David, who lived, as we see, in the 8th century. Okay. By contrast, and maybe I'll just bring this up in another tab. Just give me 1 second here. So by contrast, how do you do a search here? Wikipedia. Where do you search? Wikipedia. It's confusing. Okay, there we go. So Abu Isa Isfahani. Abu Isa, here we go. Okay, so he lived also in the 8th century, but he was in Persia. Okay, so Anan ben David, born in 715 through 795, is widely considered to be a major founder of Karaite Judaism. His followers were called Ananites, and like modern Karaites, did not believe the rabbinical Jewish oral law, such as the Mishnah, to be authoritative. Let's read on here. From the second third of the 7th century until the middle of the 8th, as a result of the tremendous intellectual commotion produced throughout West Asia, throughout West Asia by the swift early Muslim conquest, right? So we see exactly what we were saying before. This is the time, the 7th century and the 8th century were a time of incredibly rapid expansion of the Muslims out of the Arabian Peninsula into surrounding areas. And if you look at a map of Muslim conquest, you'll see that they conquered very, very quickly with very little opposition. That's where Abu Isa Isfahani rises to prominence. So that's where the atmosphere where he becomes known and prominent, or where he does his activities. Okay, so by the swift early Muslim conquests and the collision of Islam with the religions and cultures of the world, so there arose a large number of religious sects, especially in Persia, Iraq, and Syria. Judaism did not escape this general fomentation. The remnants of Second Temple sects picked up new life and flickered once more before their final extinction, and new sects also rose. Okay, so this is a stupid sentence. This is why Wikipedia, like any rabbi, cannot be 100% trusted. This is almost like a poetic statement here, right? So the Second Temple period's sects did not pick up new life and flicker once more. They were dead and gone, all of them, all of the major Second Temple period sects. Well, I guess you could say that the rabbis still existed. The Pharisees, out of which the rabbis grew, still existed, but the Sadducees were long gone. With the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE by the Romans, that was essentially, for all intents and purposes, the end of the Sadducee movement, which is why the Pharisees/rabbis, despite their crocodile tears over the destruction of the Second Temple, actually wanted the Second Temple destroyed and helped the Romans to do so. Okay, so what does this all have to do with Anan ben David? Let's check back in here. Shalom, Mexican Sephardic. So what does this all have to do with Anan ben David? So Anan, which means cloud, okay, was never a very common name among Jews, but it is attested in the Bible. So the original Anan was one of the Israelites who sealed the covenant after the return of the Babylonian captivity in Nehemiah 10. We don't have to look that up. And this is very important. So this is what you're going to hear. So there's a polemical account about Anan ben David. This is a story you're going to hear. This is the one I just mentioned. That if you say you're a Karaite, then you might hear, especially if you're speaking to rabbinical Jews, you might hear, oh, you know, the founder of the Karaite movement only became a Karaite out of spite because he was snubbed for the position of leader of the Jews, specifically Exilarch, and that was in Iraq, which we'll talk about in just a second. and therefore he's out of spite he started the Karaite movement. So this is a polemical story made up by the rabbis. It has no basis in truth, but you're going to hear it. Okay, so some polemical, and the key word here is polemical, accounts supply Anan with a typical background story often used of heretics. Right? Meaning it's following a pattern. If you want to call somebody a heretic, then this is what you're going to say about them. And this is precisely what the rabbis make up about Anan ben David. Namely, that he was frustrated in a bid for power within the religious community and as a result broke away. Okay? According to these, the exilarch, just bring that up, was the leader of the Jewish community in Mesopotamia during the Parthian and Sasanian empires and Abbasid Caliphate up until the 1258 CE Mongol invasion of Baghdad. So basically, this was the medieval leader of the Jews in Iraq, the exilarch, okay, or leader of the Jews in Mesopotamia. Okay, probably Isaac Iskawi died at around 760. Two brothers among his nearest kin, probably his nephews Anan and Hassan, were next in order of succession to the exalted office. So this is all not true. This is just a lie, basically, or at least about Anan. Eventually, Josiah was elected exilarch by the Geonim, or the leaders of the Talmudic academies in Babylon, and by the notables of the chief Jewish congregations. The choice was confirmed by the Abbasid Caliph al-Mansur, 754 to 775. The story continues that Anan was proclaimed exilarch by his followers, an act construed by the Muslim authorities as a rebellion against the authority of the Caliph, who had formerly invested Josiah. Remember, Josiah is his brother, right? Anan or Hassan. So Anan and Hassan, who had formerly invested Josiah with the position. He was arrested, meaning Anan was arrested by the authorities one Sunday in 767 and was to be executed on the ensuing Friday for high treason. Luckily for Anan, the story goes, he met in jail a prominent fellow prisoner, the founder of the Hanafi school of Islam, Abu Hanifa. He gave Anan advice which saved his life. He should set himself to expound all ambiguous precepts of the Torah in a fashion opposed to traditional interpretation and make this principle the foundation of a new religious sect. So according to this legend, Anan attempts essentially to be proclaimed as the new exilarch. The Muslim authorities don't like this. They arrest him and throw him in jail. In jail, he meets the founder, a religious leader, a religious Islamic religious leader named Abu Hanifa. And Abu Hanifa gives Anan this advice. So what is the purpose of saying that it was Abu Hanifa? Is essentially saying that Anan got his idea not from the Torah, but from a Muslim leader, rather than legitimately from the Torah. So he gave Anan advice which saved his life. So basically, Abu Hanifa, according to this legend, this false legend, told Anan to make up a new Jewish religion, to make up a new sect that was a departure from rabbinical Judaism. Again, this is all just polemic. This is all made up by the rabbis. There's really no historical proof or historicity to this account. But let's go on. So he must next get his partisans to secure the presence of the Caliph himself at the trial, which was not an unusual thing for important prosecutions. A second, please. Okay. Anan was to declare that his religion was different from rabbinical Judaism and that his followers entirely coincided with him in matters of religious doctrine. This was an easy matter for Anan to say because the majority of them were opposed to the rabbis. Complying with this advice, Anan defended himself in the presence of the Caliph al-Mansur, who granted his favor. In other words, he's not vying to be head of rabbinical Judaism. He doesn't believe in rabbinical Judaism. He's starting his own branch, or has started his own branch of Judaism, and therefore he is not going against the Caliph in trying to take away the position from his brother. Josiah or Hassan, who had been named as Exilarch. And let's read on. The story so closely fits polemical cliches about the personal motives of heretics that is open to grave doubt. Moreover, Leon Nimoy is one of the best-known Karaite researchers. He wrote the Karaite mythology, which is kind of like the Bible, pardon the analogy, or kind of like the encyclopedia of Karaitism. So Leon Nimoy was a prominent and well-known Karaite historian and researcher. So Tanach-only, so he's one of the Gaonim. Okay, he was one of the heads of the yeshiva in Iraq. Scarcely 90 years after Anan's secession, tells us nothing about his aristocratic Davidic descent or about the contest for the office of Exilarch, which allegedly served as the immediate cause of his apostasy. He later notes that Tanach-only, a devout rabbinic Jew, lived where Anan's activities took place, and that the Karaite sage Jacob Kirkasani, who we'll get to in one of the future Karaite history series, never mentioned Anan's purported lineage or candidacy for Exilarch. So basically, Tanach-only, who would have mentioned this, one of the Gaonim, one of the leaders of the rabbinical community in Iraq, never mentions anything about the story. And Jacob Kirkasani, a very well-known, one of the earliest and most or best-known Karaite sages, also never mentions any of this. Okay, see Karaite Anthology, DL Judaica Series 7. So that's Karaite Anthology. That's the book that was written by Leon Nimoy. Okay. So therefore, if somebody says to you, oh, your original leader, the founder of the Karaites, and by the way, remember, Anan's followers were never called Karaites. The term Karaite didn't come into being until about the 700s, until about 2 centuries later. So if anyone says that the founder of the Karaites he started the movement because he was snubbed for the job of Exilarch, then you can come to Rabbi Wikipedia and show that this is nonsense. You could say that the leading or one of the leading rabbinical leaders, as well as one of the leading Karaite sages that were contemporary with Anan, never mentioned any of this, and it's a made-up story. It's a polemic. It's a lie to try to discredit the Karaites. So Anan ben David's Sefer HaMitzvot, or Book of the Precepts, was published about 770. He adopted many principles and opinions of other anti-rabbinic forms of Judaism. It has been suggested that he took much from the Sadducees and the Essenes. Those were 2 of the 3 main sects during the Second Temple period, the late Second Temple period, whose writings were still in circulation. For example, these older sects prohibited the burning of any lights and leaving of one's dwelling on Shabbat. They also enjoined the actual observation of the new moon for the appointment of festivals and celebrated Shavuot, one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals on a Sunday, all of which I shouldn't say all of which. So not burning any lights, of course, made its way into mainstream Karaism. I disagree with it. That's why we are Neo-Karaites or Neo-Karaites, and we are of the Chozrim B'Tanach movement of Karaism. Leaving one's dwelling on Shabbat, of course, I don't agree with. And that also did not make its way into mainstream Karaism. But of course, these 2 things, of course, I agree with, and we do to this very day. So the actual observation of the new moon, by the way, we will have a new moon coming up in about a week. And Shavuot always falls on a Sunday, and we spoke about that in recent weeks because hold on 1 second, please. So just adding a couple of people to the WhatsApp group here. So right, so Shavuot indeed does fall out on a Sunday, and that is very much in line with the idea of this phrase L'machorat Shabbat. We spoke about in previous weeks how the word Shabbat can only mean three things, two of which appear in Leviticus 23, the third which appears in Leviticus 25, which we'll get to. I'm not going to rehash it right now. Okay, let's move on. Fundamental principles of Ananism. So Abu Hanifa was accustomed in certain cases to take the words of the Quran, not in their literal, but in a symbolic sense. Anan, maybe let's see how much longer this goes on. Okay, let me read it through it quickly. Anan adopted a similar method with the Hebrew text of the Bible. Illustrations of this method are not infrequently indeed afforded by the Talmud himself. Thus, he interpreted the prohibition of plowing on the Shabbat as applying to marital intercourse. So I'm gonna, I don't want to get a little crude here, but yeah, you guys can figure that one out. Like, I'm gonna go plow my wife right now, kind of thing. Okay, I got crude. Sorry. The word brothers, in connection with levirate marriage, he interpreted as relatives, which, by the way, I do believe that holds up in the Tanakh. We see it even in the story of Ruth. Anan's method of interpretation, however, was distinct from its Muslim counterpart in that he primarily built upon the analogy of expressions similar to the rabbinical Gezerah Shava and single letters. So we're not going to get into all that in details now. Some sources claim that Anan borrowed the belief from the transmigration of the soul. Okay, so that essentially, for all intents and purposes, means reincarnation from Muslim sectarians. This doctrine represented in Greek antiquity, especially by some Greek dude, the Platonists and the Pythagoreans, the same guy who invented a squared plus b squared equals c squared, had always been widespread in India. And even though it was found among some Muslim sects, such as, we're getting too much into the weeds here. Let's move to the next paragraph. A number of Ben David's teachings differ from those of rabbinic Jews and of the majority of modern Karaites. Anan rejected the ad measurements instituted by the rabbis, shiurim, and instead of any permissible amount for prohibited things. So, again, I don't want to get into all the details here, but the rabbis say that for something to count as, let's say, I have to remember now my particular rabbinical halakha laws, but so kazayat means the size of an olive, if I'm not mistaken. When a rabbi says, when a rabbinical Jew says the blessing on challah on Shabbat, that he then has to eat at least one kazayat of the challah for that blessing to not be taken in vain, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me on that one, but that's the way I remember it from my years as an Orthodox rabbinical Jew, which I was for about basically 10 years, although I never really bought into the whole thing. And right, so he insisted that it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a certain size. Even the smallest amount is good enough. He insisted that even the smallest atom of anything prohibited mingling with an infinitely large quantity of a thing permitted was sufficient to render the whole of the latter prohibited. In addition, he maintained that as long as Israel is in exile, the flesh of animals, with the exception of the deer, the pigeon, and the turtle dove, is forbidden from being eaten, although permitted animals may be eaten with dairy. And that's something that was picked up by later Karaites, which we'll talk about in future installments of Karaite history. Okay. So within Judaism, restrictions on consuming meat and poultry that extend beyond the rabbinic concept of kashrut are not unique to Ananism. The Talmud relates that after the destruction of the Second Temple, certain ascetics, such as Abu Isa, who we learned about last week, sought to prohibit meat and wine because they'd been employed in the temple ritual, and that Joshua ben Hananiah repressed the movement. In modern times, that's irrelevant for here. Okay, I think should we go on a little bit more here? Science, blah, 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 blah. Almost done. So let's do it, okay? Rules for slaughtering. To this limitation of the eating of meat must also be added his regulation concerning the personality of the individual who slays creatures for food. Anan rejected the broad precept of the Talmud that slaughtering is permissible to anybody, demanded a certain dignity for the act, and required from the slaughterer a complete profession of faith. From this dates the Karaite custom of reciting the articles of the creed preparatory to slaughtering. Finally, not satisfied with the Talmudic dictum that in the act of slaughtering it is sufficient to cut through 2 ducts, gullet, and windpipe, and Anan required that in addition 2 more arteries and veins. Okay, this is also getting too much into the weeds. In addition to the legal fast days appointed by the Bible, Anan, by means of word analogies, instituted the following: the 7th day of every month, the 14th and 15th of Adar, instead of the rabbinical fast of the 13th. So he added fast days, okay? Including thus the Purim festival, also 70 days fast from the 13th of Nisan to the 23rd of Sivan, including Passover and Shavuot as times of fasting when neither food nor drink could be partaken of by day. So I wonder where he got that from, right? That's like Ramadan. So remember, he lived in within the Islamic empire. So rules for Shabbat: it was forbidden to go outside of one's dwelling on Shabbat except for the purpose of prayer or necessity. That's ridiculous. That's completely nuts. Anything that is ordinarily carried on the shoulders, owing to its size or weight, must not be carried around even in a room. Okay, I can kind of agree with that one. Anan's law book insists that the Sabbath evening must be passed in darkness. Lights kindled in the daytime on Friday must be extinguished at nightfall. That's insanity. But it's forbidden to pass the Sabbath in a place artificially illuminated. Cooking and baking must be done on Friday, not only for Friday and Saturday, but also for Saturday night to forestall any impatient longing for the close of the Sabbath. Foods already prepared must not be kept warm, but eaten cold. Unleavened bread must be made exclusively of barley meal. Can understand where he's getting that from, because Passover is essentially a holiday celebrating the barley harvest. But really, the only thing that has to be made of barley or consists of barley is the Omer offering, which we learned about in Leviticus 23. And he that prepares it out of wheat and meal incurs the punishment appointed for those that eat actual leavened chametz in Karaite. Nor may this unleavened bread be baked in an oven, but like the paschal lamb, it must be roasted on the coals. Okay. And the last paragraph: Anan ben David, in direct contradiction of Karaites such as Daniel al-Kumisi, who we'll get to in the future, had small respect for science and is often shown in his law book. He forbids the use of medicines and of medical aid in general, for it is written, he says, I, God, am the physician. Exodus 15:26. This is held to prohibit drugs and doctors. His opposition, so like who is it that prohibits the doctors in the United States? Is it the Seventh-day Adventists, if I'm not mistaken? No, it's I think it is. This is held to prohibit drugs and doctors. His opposition to astronomical determination of the festivals, of which he boasted the Caliph, led him to declare astronomy as a branch of the astrology and divination forbidden by the Bible, thus undermining the very foundation of the rabbinical calendar. Okay, so that's Anan ben David. Any questions, any comments? Okay. If not, then let's go right into the book of Zechariah. We'll learn the book of Zechariah for a little while, and then we're going to go into Leviticus chapter 24. So let's close out. I'll just leave it open in case we need it. We're going to go into the book of Zechariah. Actually, let's get a little background from Rabbi Wikipedia about Zechariah. Place. Okay, so we're learning now the book of Zechariah. So Zechariah was a person in the Hebrew Bible traditionally considered the author of the book of Zechariah, the 11th of the 12 minor prophets. Right, so the 12 minor prophets are actually considered a single book in the Tanakh, and within those 12 prophets, Zechariah is the second to last. We learned the last one in the canon. We finished it last week. That was Malachi. The book of Zechariah depicts the eponymous, and I always forget what that word means, so let's look it up. right, the eponymous character, meaning Zechariah himself, as the son of Barachiah, the son of Edo. The book of Ezra instead names Zechariah as the son of Edo. Targum Lamentations 2:20 names Zechariah as the son of Edo, as does the book of Matthew 23:35. This is not the same person as Edo the seer, who lived during the reigns of Solomon, Rehoboam, and Abiah, and is most likely the Edo mentioned in Ezra 8:17. Zechariah's prophetical career probably began in the second regnal year of Darius the Great, king of the Achaemenid Empire. Zechariah's greatest concern, and he's mentioned at the beginning of the book of Zechariah, Zechariah's greatest concern appears to have been with the building of the second temple. He features in chapters 1 to 8 of the book, but he does not appear in the remaining chapters, book 9 to 14. Okay, so this is going to be, it's pretty short. So let's read. The book of Zechariah introduces him as Barachiah, the son of Edo. The book of Ezra names Zechariah as the son of Edo, but it's likely that Barachiah was Zechariah's father and Edo his grandfather. I think we've already kind of read this, but Targum Lamentations 2:20 names this Zechariah, son of Edo, as does the book of Matthew 23:35. This is not, I think this is a repeat of what we saw in the previous paragraph. Oh, I don't know why they repeated it, but that's Rabbi Wikipedia for you. He likes to repeat himself. And is most likely the Edo mentioned in Ezra 8:17. His name means Yah, remember, Zechariah. Okay? Zechariah. Yah remembers or remembered. Zechariah's prophetical career probably began in the second year of Darius the Great, king of the Achaemenid Empire. We'll talk a little bit about Darius the Great. This is a repeat of the previous paragraph, so I'm not going to read it. And we don't need any of this stuff. Okay, so let's get into the book of Zechariah and see what we can learn from it. So the book of Zechariah, I'm going to start in the Hebrew. You can follow along in the English or whichever language you prefer. May I suggest Serbian? For those of you who want to try out something new. And just give me 1 second here. Okay, so the book begins. בחודש השמיני, בשנת שתיים לדריווש. We'll talk about Darius in a second. He was the king of Persia. היה דבר יהוה אל זכריה בן ברכיה בן עידו הנביא לאמור. So let's translate this. In the 8th month. 8th month is the month after the holidays of Yom Teruah, Yom Kippurim, and Sukkot. So in the 2nd year of Darius is Darius, the king of Persia. We're going to talk about him in just a second. The word of Yahweh was upon Zechariah, the son of Barachiah, the son of Edo, the prophet, to say. Okay, so let's just very briefly talk about Darius, who's mentioned in a number of books of the Tanakh. So he was known as Darius the Great. So Darius the Great, commonly known, or Darius the First, commonly known as Darius the Great, was the 3rd king of kings of the Achaemenid Empire, reigning from 522 BCE until his death in 486 BCE. So just to put this in a little bit of perspective, this is during the time that the Second Temple was rebuilt. The Second Temple is dated, if I'm not mistaken, to around 500 BCE. So it was during the reign of Darius that the Second Temple was begun to be rebuilt. And in 586 BCE, so about almost a century earlier, or a century before his death, that's when the Jews, and we can call them Jews at this point, because they were Judeans, were exiled by the Babylonians or some of them, to Babylon. Okay. He ruled the empire at its territorial peak. Which empire? Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire, essentially, when it included much of West Asia, parts of the Balkans. Sorry, you hear that? Thrace, Macedonia, and Paeonia. I don't know if that includes Serbia, and the Caucasus, most of the Black Sea's coastal regions, Central Asia, the Indus Valley in the Far East, and portions of North Africa and Northeast Africa, including Egypt. So basically, a very expansive empire. Darius ascended the throne after overthrowing the Achaemenid monarch Smerdis, we'll just call him. He's known better by that name, although nobody really knows who nobody in modern America knows him. We claimed was in fact an imposter named Gaumata. There's a whole story about this. I'm not even going to get into this right now. It doesn't matter. The new king met with rebellions throughout the empire. This is talking about Darius, but quelled each of them. A major event of Darius's career, described in Greek historiography, was his punitive expedition against Athens and Eretria for their participation in the Ionian revolt. We don't have to get into that. Darius organized the empire. Okay, this is getting too deep into it. Let's see if this specifically mentioned about his relationship to the Jews. If not, we're just going to move on. Now, this is too long and too complicated. There's a whole PhD thesis there. Okay, so let's go back to the book of Zechariah. Yeah, the Noahide laws, I agree with you, Turiel. It's insulting and it's sickening. I never want to hear about the Noahide laws again either. I have a whole thing that I could say. Maybe next week I'll talk about that. Okay, so going back to the book of Zechariah. So just to, let's see if we can bring this up. Where is it? So just to put things in perspective, where was that I saw? Hold on. I just wanted to sort. There was like a chart. Session. Not too far down. There it is. Okay, so there's Darius over here. That was his reign, and of course Cyrus, also known as Koresh. This is the king that Nehemiah, in the book of Nehemiah, petitions to allow the Jews to go back, the Jews to return to Israel. Actually, that might have been Cyrus II. 30, that was probably Cyrus II, not Cyrus I. Okay, let's go back to the book of Zechariah. So this is the prophecy of Zechariah in the second year of Darius. So if Darius's reign, I think this is his life. I don't know when his reign is. At any rate, we're going to say around 500 BC. Okay. And remember, Darius he took over from in a very tumultuous time in Persian history, and he had a lot of problems when he first rose to power. And I won't get into the details now, but we mentioned it when we were looking at that Wikipedia article. Okay. Katzaf Yahweh al avotechem katzef. So to paraphrase it, Yahweh was extremely angry with your ancestors, with your forefathers. Okay, we see repetition again. Literally, if I were to translate it, literally, katzaf. Yahweh was angry on towards your forefathers with anger. But really, we know repetition means emphasis, and even though this is the verb in the perfect form, and this is a noun, it's still a form of repetition. So basically, the implication here is that Yahweh had great anger towards your forefathers. Yamata alehem komar Yahweh tzivot. And you said to them, just 1 second here. I just want to parse this in my own head for 1 second. Okay, I'm not sure who the you is. We can look at maybe some commentary. But you said to them, Ko amar Yahweh Tzevaot, so says Yahweh of hosts. Shuvu elai ne'um Yahweh Tzevaot, va'ashuv elechem amar Yahweh Tzevaot. Return to me, declares Yahweh of hosts, and I will return to you, says Yahweh of hosts. Where did we see this before? We actually saw this in the book of Malachi. Let's look at that for 1 second. Malachi, which we finished studying last week. So was it chapter 4, I believe? Just put it in English to save some time. 1 second. No, I think it's chapter 3. Chapter 2. We'll find out what's right. I can't find it right now. 1 second. Chapter 1. One second, sorry about this. I'm on a mission to find it. One more second. I can't find it. We'll just skip ahead. There it is. So Malachi chapter 3, verse 6 is that same phrase. So as a review of the book of Malachi, which we learned, okay? Malachi is a dialectic between God and Israel. Back and forth, challenges and responses. So I, Yahweh, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. Ever since the time of your ancestors, you've turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says Yahweh Almighty. And if we look at that in the Hebrew, so that's Malachi chapter 3, verse 6. Here, Shuvu elai v'shuvu elechem, amar Yahweh Tzevaot. This is the beginning of another dialectic. Yahweh says to Israel, return to me, and I will return to you. And then Israel responds, why should we return? And then there's a whole thing about what purpose do we have in serving God? What do we get out of it? So at any rate, we see the same phrase in Malachi, and let's see if it's actually even word for word. Okay? Shuvu elai ne'um Yahweh Tzevaot v'ashuv alechem amar Yahweh Tzevaot. And here we have Shuvu elai v'ashuv elechem amar Yahweh Tzevaot. So it's almost the same. It's really essentially the same. V'ashuv elechem amar Yahweh Tzevaot. Shuvu elai v'ashuv elechem amar Yahweh. So it's the same thing, except here in the book of Zechariah, in between this ashuva and alechem, I will return to you, is ashuv elechem. I'm sorry. Anyway, it's pretty much the same. We don't have to get into details. Close enough. Okay. So it's interesting that Zechariah is saying the same phrase as Malachi. right? Basically, almost word for word. Okay. Let's check in to see if there are any comments or questions. Yes, that is true, Tsuri. All right, verse 4. So come back to me and I'll come back to you. Al. I love this verse. It's a long verse, so we'll try to break it up. So let's find the etnach over to here. Okay. Al tiyu. כאבותיכם אשר קראו עליהם הנביאים הראשונים לאמור כה אמר יהוה צבאות שובו נא מדרכיכם הרעים ומעו מעלליכם הרעים. So Zechariah is saying, come back to me and I will come back to you. Verse 4, don't be like your forefathers, to whom cried out the earlier prophets, the prophets of old, literally the first prophets, but it means the earlier prophets. Lemor, saying, Ko amar Yahweh Tzvaot, saying, so says Yahweh of hosts, Shuvum na medarchechem hara'im, return, I beg you, return from your evil ways. Me alalechem hara'im, and from your evil deeds. That's what the earlier prophets said to your forefathers. Don't be like them. V'lo shamu, v'lo ikshivu elai ne'um Yahweh. But they did not listen, and they did not pay attention to me, declares Yahweh. Verse 5. Avotechem ayehem v'anivi'im ale'olam yichyu. And your forefathers, where are they? Now, I'm going to paraphrase, get the point across. Your forefathers, where are they now? But the prophets are eternal. The prophets exist into eternity, forever. Okay? So the prophets of old cried out to your forefathers, please return from your evil ways. Your forefathers didn't follow them. They didn't listen to them. They didn't pay attention to them. Where are your forefathers now? They're gone. But the prophets are still here. That's what the Karaites is. It's very powerful. It's very, very powerful. Right? Verse 6. Enough here. There we go. דבריי וחוקיי אשר ציוויתי את עבדיי הנביאים הלא השיגו אבותיכם. This is so powerful, really. So I'll translate literally and then we'll say what it really means. But I think even the literal translation will already give you an idea of what it's trying to say. דבריי וחוקיי, but did not my words and my laws, which I commanded my servants, the prophets, did they not catch up with you? In other words, these things, or really more likely the way I'm understanding this, and I'm sure it's up for discussion, is all of these words, all of these laws that I gave you, which you decided to ignore, ignoring them, didn't that eventually catch up to you? Right? How did it catch up to you or catch up to your forefathers? Because they're gone. Right? They were exiled. The Babylonians conquered the land of Judea and exiled your forefathers and killed them. They're gone. So didn't the words of the prophets, the warnings of the prophets, they caught up to your forefathers? וישובו ויאמרו כאשר זמם יהוה צבאות לעשות לנו כדרכינו וכמעלנו כן עשה איתנו. And they came back and they said, when Yahweh, let me just figure out how I want to translate this exactly. ישובו יאמרו כאשר זמם יהוה צבאות לעשות לנו כדרכינו וכמעלנו כן עשה איתנו. So they came back and they said, when Yahweh became angry at them, or no, not became angry, I'm sorry, like Yozma, but when took the initiative, when Yahweh of hosts took the initiative to do to us according to our ways and according to our deeds. So he did. In other words, after, okay, so now let me interpret it. Let me put this in more free, in more free flowing prose. So did not. So in the here, let's go through all of verse 6. So didn't my words, or didn't the words of the prophets catch up with your forefathers? Or their failure to keep my law, didn't that catch up to your forefathers? And then when it did, they came back and they said that Yahweh had taken the initiative to pay us back according to our evil ways and our evil deeds. And so he did. So this whole thing is essentially a warning against the current generation of Israelites in the time of Dariavesh to look back at the mistakes that their forefathers made. The prophets of old cried out to the forefathers, but the forefathers, the ancestors, ignored them. And so eventually that caught up with them and they were destroyed. They were killed and they were exiled. So don't be like them. Come back to me, says Yahweh, and I shall come back to you. Right? It's very powerful. Let's do a little bit of a translation and interpretation. So Zechariah chapter 1. They bring it up in the Robert Alter. Just give me a second. Sorry, I should have had this set up earlier, but I didn't. I knew I forgot to do something. Almost there. Okay, so that's page 4509. Okay, so let's just read Robert Alter's translation to get a good flowing translation. In the 7th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to Zechariah the prophet, the son of Barachiah, son of Iddo, saying, the Lord was very furious with your fathers, and you shall say to them, thus says the Lord of armies, turn back to me, said the Lord of armies, that I may turn back to you, said the Lord of armies. Do not be like your fathers, to whom the former prophets called, saying, thus said the Lord of armies, turn back, pray, or turn back, please, from your evil ways and from your evil acts. But they did not listen to me, said the Lord. Your fathers, where are they? And the prophets, did they live forever? But my words and my statutes that I charged my servants the prophets, did they not overtake your fathers? And they turned back and said, as the Lord of armies aimed to do to us according to our ways and according to our acts, so he has done with us. All right? See if there's any interesting commentary. The former prophets, it's verse 4. Zechariah has in mind especially Jeremiah, but probably also Isaiah, Ezekiel, and perhaps others. He thus inserts himself at this late date, 520 BCE, in the long line of prophecy. It was the failure of the earlier generations to listen to their prophets that brought upon them the national catastrophe, and he implores his own audience to make a new start by listening to him. And the prophets, did they live forever? This is best construed as the people's rejoinder to Zechariah. If their forefathers are now gone, so are the prophets who invade against them. As the Lord of the armies aimed to do to us, the people now can see that the justice of the prophets' argument, not only our fathers, but we as well have suffered for our acts, as our present reduced condition bears witness, and we are thus ready to change our ways. Okay, that's it. So now let's go on to verse 7. And this is a cool vision. I love this one. All right, so that's the intro. Don't be like your forefathers who ignored the prophets, and look what happened to them. Turn over a new leaf and listen, or return to Yahweh so that he may return to you. Okay, so here's Zechariah's first vision. This is verse 7. We're in Zechariah chapter 1, verse 7. Okay, so biyom asrim wa arba l'shtesar chodesh u'chodesh Shavat v'shnat shtayim l'Daryavesh. So it was on the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month of Shvat. We are right now in the month of Shvat. V'shnat shtayim l'Daryavesh, in the second year of Daryavesh, of Darius. So a couple of things to say here. So here we see here the Babylonian name for the month, for the 11th month, Shvat. So why is the Babylonian name here? Because this is during the period of the Babylonian, or actually the Persians, the Medians, and the Persians took over. Or the Medians took over from the Babylonians, and the Persians quickly took over the Medians. But this is the time essentially of after the Babylonian exile, and so we're getting the Aramaic name or the Babylonian name for the month. This does not in any way, shape, or form imply that this gives it a stamp of approval. It was the reality of the times that since we lived under Babylonian and Persian occupation, that the Tanakh or Zechariah is using the Babylonian month names. But in the Torah, we never see, I shouldn't say in the Torah, well, certainly in the Torah we don't, but I'm saying in the earlier books of the Torah, before the exile, we don't see any use of the Babylonian month names. And in the Torah or in the Tanakh, before the exile, all we see for the month names is numbers, except for a couple of exceptions like Ziv, Bul, Etanim, but we're not going to get into that right now. Those are just nicknames. But we always see the first month, the second month, the third month, the fourth month. Okay, but here it's being given its Babylonian name. In the second year of Daryavesh, so this is the same regnal year. So his first prophecy was in the 8th month of the second year of Daryavesh. This is on the 24th day of the 11th month, so 3 months later. Okay. Okay. So Haya Dvar Yahweh El Zechariah ben Berachia ben Eido Novi Lemon. So the word of Yahweh was upon Zechariah, the son of Berachia, the son of Edo, the prophet, saying. Okay, so he's given the same name. We have the same lineage here. His father is Berachia, his grandfather was Edo. We saw a note when we looked up Zechariah that this is very possibly the same Edo that is mentioned in the book of Ezra. Right? Well, it is mentioned in Zechariah, the son of Edo, in the book of Ezra, but then where was it? No. Okay, let's go on. Okay, so here's the vision that Zechariah had. ראיתי הלילה, והנה איש רוכב על סוס אדום, והוא עומד בין ההדסים אשר במצולה. So I had a vision at night, or I saw it was nighttime. והנה איש רוכב על סוס אדום, and behold, a man was riding upon a, well, they're going to translate this as red, but it really means brown. And I hope they're good enough to translate it here. No, they translate it as red here. See how Robert Alter translates it. Because there is no such thing as a red horse, right? A bay horse. Good. So Robert Alter is good enough to not say red. A bay horse. Okay. And he has a comment here. While this is the realistic color for a horse, the Hebrew Adom could also mean more surrealistically red. This would be the color of blood, perhaps a prelude to God's fury with the nations expressed in verse 16. Okay. This also gets back to the whole idea of the para aduma, which the rabbis interpret as red, but really Adom is related to Adama. So it really means brownish, reddish brown, ruddy, maybe. No, ruddy is the wrong word. Brownish. So a brown horse we're going to go with. Nu Omed ben Adasim. And so this horse was standing among the myrtle, the myrtles. Oops. Where did we go? Asher b'mitzula. Mitzula is the deep or the valley. Here they translate as hollow. So let's look at myrtle. Myrtle is one of the 4 species that the rabbis, not only the rabbis actually, but we learned about this last week. So one of the 4 species that on Sukkot, the rabbis say you should wave. What they interpret ale avot, the thick-leaved trees, as the myrtle. Okay. So remember we spoke about the 4 species of the rabbis. One of them, and there are 4 types. There's the tree with the beautiful fruit. There is the palm frond. There is the branches of the thick-leaved tree, and there is the aravot hanachal, the willows, the brook willows, the willow brooks, the brooks of the willow. So the rabbis, and we said that the rabbis' interpretation of those 4 species, or the rabbis' yisum, how do you say yisum in English? The rabbis' application of those 4 types of plant are the etrog, the date palm frond, which I agree with, the myrtle, and basically just willow branches. Okay. So we also saw in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 15, that the myrtle was also one of the 4 archetypes, one of the 4 species, we'll just call it. But there, the myrtle was understood to take the role of the aravot nachal, of the brooks of the willow. And this makes a lot more sense. Zechariah 8. Shoham? No. So Zechariah, this statement here in Zechariah, oh boy, I'd have to talk about this for 20 minutes, so I don't want to get too deep. This statement in Zechariah essentially, maybe I will get into it for a minute or two, essentially supports, as of course it would and should, supports the view by Nehemiah in Nehemiah chapter 8:15 of the interpretation of the 4, I'm going to call them the 4 species, but they're not really 4 species, the 4 archetypes of plants, and in doing so rejects the rabbinical understanding of the possibility that the myrtle could, or rejects basically the rabbinical understanding. This would be a whole lesson in and of itself. I don't think we should get into it right now. We're just going to get too sidetracked. Okay. At any rate, so what is myrtle? These are myrtle branches. Okay. Let's see if we can find a myrtle tree, myrtle bush. And they grow all over Israel. I mean, they're planted really because they're associated with Sukkot. So how do we get this up? Like so. Okay, so that's a myrtle bush. That's myrtle. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So in the ravine, shall we say, Zechariah sees a man riding on a brown horse among the myrtle bushes. And again, the point with relevance to this regarding the myrtle bushes, it clearly seems to imply that the rabbi's interpretation of the myrtle as the application of one of the 4 species in Leviticus chapter 23 of the thick-leaved tree as myrtle doesn't make any sense. Okay, because here we see bushes in a ravine like near a stream. So this is much more in line with Nehemiah's interpretation of. Nehemiah also mentions myrtle, but he mentions them by process of elimination. In Nehemiah chapter 8:15, he mentions them as the application of the willow brook, the brooks of the willow, of the four plant archetypes. Okay, again, I don't want to get too sidetracked. Okay. V'acharao susim adumim sirukim ulevanim. So behind him were a brown, white, and sirukim. Let's get a translation for that. Sorrel. Let's get a definition for sorrel. So here, a warm light to medium reddish brown or brownish orange color. Frequently used to describe a specific coat color in horses. Let's see if we can get an image of that. So there we go. And let's bring that up. Oops. Okay, so that's sorrel. So different colored horses. So brown, sorrel, and white horses. Okay. So we have a man riding on a brown horse, and behind him we have a bunch of other horses. Okay, verse 9. Let's check in if there are any comments. Right. So Tsuri asked, so why do the rabbis use Babylonian gods for names for months in the Hebrew calendar, like Tammuz? The simple answer is what we see right here in excuse me, in the book of Zechariah, because that's what the Babylonians used. And once the Jews were exiled by the Babylonians, they adopted the Hebrew names, just like Jews living in America. We'll talk about January, February, August, September. They're using the Roman names for the months because they live in a culture that adopted those Roman names in Western culture. So that's the reason. I'm not saying it's right, but that's the reason. Okay. Wamar ma ele Adoni. And I said, hold on one second here. Okay, I'm gonna have to take care of something very, very briefly. I'm just gonna put everything on a brief hold here. Okay, you guys can study the book of Zechariah, chapter 1, on your own. I'll be back in less than 5 minutes. I'm not gonna put music up. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. There was something I forgot that I needed to do that I had to do very quickly, and I couldn't wait. Okay. All right. So okay, so we're in verse 9. This is Zechariah chapter 1, verse 9. Omar, ma'ena Adoni. And I said, what are these, master? My master. Speaking to God. Really to it. I'm sorry, I should say, we're going to see exactly speaking to an angel. Okay? The angel represents God. Okay. So notice the word Adoni. So it's not Adonai, which would imply really speaking directly to God, even though it's not the name of God. We know the name of God is not Adonai. The name of God is Yahweh. But sometimes he's called Adonai Yahweh, my master Yahweh. And when the word Adonai is used, it's what's called the majestic plural. And I know I've seen some scholars say there's no such thing as the majestic plural in Hebrew. I don't believe it. There is. And so Adonai would mean my master when speaking to God, but it would be in the plural, just as the classic example is when the queen says it's tea time, she'll say, oh, it's time for us, or we are going to have tea now, when she's talking only about herself. That's the majestic plural, but this is in the singular, so it's not speaking about Yahweh, it's not speaking about God, it's speaking about an angel that Zechariah is interlocuting with. And the other important thing to point out for those coming from rabbinical Judaism is that the word Adoni or Adonai is not a name of God. It's his title or his honorific, my master. Okay, so Yomer Elai Hamalach, and the angel said to me, literally the messenger. Okay, and here we see an example of the word messenger being used, but it really is a shorthand for Malach Yahweh, a messenger of Yahweh. But the word Malach really just means messenger. And there are other instances, which we're not going to track down right now, in the Tanakh, where the word Malach just means a messenger, a human sending a letter from one person to another, or sending a message from one person to another person. This occurs a number of times in the Tanakh. So a Malach is just a messenger of Yahweh. We also said that the word angel comes from the Greek word angelos, which just means a messenger. Okay, so an angel is just a messenger, but a messenger of God. In this case, the context here, even though it doesn't say Malach Yahweh, which it often does, in this case, the implication is, of course, a messenger of God. In other words, an angel. It's interesting that this is now one book before Malachi, which we saw meant my messenger. And just for review purposes, the name of the book, Malachi, here the name of the book is Zechariah, because the main character is a man named Zechariah. But in the book of Malachi, we saw that it's probable, I won't say definite, but probable that the name of the prophet was not Malachi, that Malachi just means my messenger. And we saw in chapter 3, I believe it was, I think the beginning of chapter 3 in Malachi, in the book of Malachi, we actually have it right here. Okay. Shlachet Malachi, or is it verse 4? Vishalachti Malachi. Let's see. Where is it? I guess it's not 4. Is it 2? Find it. Now I have to find it. Now I'm on a mission to find it again. No, I remember it being chapter 3. It's possible. So let me just find it here. I don't know why I can't find it. Here it is. Yes, right at the beginning of chapter 3. Okay. So Hine Sholech. So this is the book of Malachi. Hine Sholech Malachi upina derech lefanai. So behold, I am sending my angel. This is God speaking, and he will clear a path before me. Bitom yavo el hechalo. And suddenly he, meaning God, will come into his temple. into the temple of the master. Asher atem mevakshim umalach habrit. Okay, we're not going to go on, right? But we see here again the use of the word Malachi, and this is probably, or my messenger, and this is probably where the book gets its name, and it's not the proper name of a prophet. The prophet in this book is probably not named Malachi. It just means my messenger, because in the beginning of chapter 3 of Malachi, it uses the phrase, or uses the word my messenger. Okay, phrase my messenger. Okay, so ויאמר אלי המלאך הדובר בי, אני אראך מהם האלה. So the messenger of God, the angel that was speaking to me, said, I will show you what these are. What is the meaning of these? Verse 10. ויען האיש העומד בין ההדסים, ויאמר. So the man that was standing between the myrtle bushes, and this is of course referring to the man sitting on the horse. Okay, right here, because it says in verse 8 there was a man riding on a brown horse, and he was standing, or he was stationed, literally standing, but it means he was positioned between the myrtle bushes. Okay, so Uya'an ha'ish ha'omed ben ahadasim. So this man that was sitting on the horse answered and said, Ela asher shalach Yahweh litalech ba'aretz. These are the ones that Yahweh has sent to go to and fro in the earth, to basically go back and forth, or to go to and fro across the earth. Okay, to explore. I don't know, I can't think of a better word. To go to and fro is the way they usually translate it. See how Robert Alter translates that one. We can get a better translation. To go about the earth. Okay, good enough. Ya'anu. Again, let's find that semicolon. Ya'anu et malach Yahweh omed ben hadasim yomru itarchu ba'aretz. And then this, again, I'll translate literally, and I'll give the understanding of it, the interpretation of it. Ya'anu et malach Yahweh omed ben hadasim, and the messenger of Yahweh that was standing between the myrtles said, go to and fro on across the earth, or on the earth. So the situation we have here is we have a man, we have one horse, we have one brown horse, or reddish brown horse, we'll call it, so we can get the word Adom in there, which is usually translated as red. So we have a man sitting on top of a reddish brown horse among the myrtle bushes. Behind him are a whole bunch of other horses, ostensibly with other men on them. Zechariah speaks to the man, or asks the man, which he calls the Malach, who's an angel, in this vision. And Zechariah says to this man sitting on the red horse, on the brown red horse, says, "What is the meaning of all this?" And the man on the brown horse says, "I will tell you the meaning of all this. All these other horses with all the people on them, they are meant to go to and fro across the earth." And then this one man sitting on the lead man sitting on the brown reddish horse says to those other ones, says, "Go to and fro across the earth." That's where we are. V'hine kol haaretz yoshevet v'shokatet. And behold, the entire land was settled and at rest. Okay, let's get a little. I love this stuff. All the prophets are amazing. And maybe we'll stop here for Zechariah and go into Leviticus, although it is already getting late. So let me just stop altogether. Okay, so let's get a little translation. We'll get a Robert Alter translation on this, and then we'll get some of his interpretation, just to get another point of view. So I said, we'll start in verse 9. I said, "What are these, my Lord?" And the messenger speaking to me answered, "I shall show you what these are." And the man standing among the myrtles answered and said, "It is these that the Lord has sent to go about the earth." And they answered the Lord's messenger who was standing among the myrtles, and they said, "We have gone about the earth, and look, all the earth dwells tranquilly." Let's see that one more time in the Hebrew. I'm sorry. Yes, so I gave a wrong translation. My mistake. So Robert Alter is correct. So it's all these other ones that said, "We have gone about the earth, and all the earth is settled and at rest. Okay, all the earth dwells tranquilly." Okay. And the Lord's messenger answered and said, "O Lord of all," okay, we didn't get to this yet. So let's finish this off. This is part of the same prophecy. So we're in verse 12. Wa'yad Malach Yahweh, and the angel or the messenger of Yahweh, the angel answered. And so this is the one that is sitting on that one main horse, that red horse. Yomer Yahweh Tzevaot ad matai eta lo tirachem et Yerushalayim wa et arei Yehuda. And said, Yahweh of hosts, until when will you not have mercy upon you or upon Jerusalem and the cities of Judah, of Judea? Asher za'amta ze shivim shana, against whom you have fumed, you have been furious for these 70 years. Right? So there's prophecy before the exile that the exile would last for 70 years. So this is clearly towards the end of that 70-year period. So if the temple was destroyed in 586, minus 70 is 516. I think we saw earlier from Rabbi Wikipedia that his prophecy was dated, or no, I think it was an introduction from Robert Alter, that he dates Zechariah's prophecy to around 520 BCE, right here. So that would place it just about 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, meaning towards the end, if that date is accurate, towards the end of the 70-year period of exile, which was prophesied when before the Israelites were exiled by the Babylonians. Verse 13. And Yahweh answered the messenger, or the angel that was speaking to me, with good words and comforting words. So now we have Yahweh in the picture. So the angel, he's the one sitting on the red horse. He's the main guy sitting on the red horse near the cleft, ostensibly by a river, in the myrtle bushes, which are therefore by a river. Therefore, they are aravot nachal, not anaf aleavot. They're not of the thick-leaved trees archetype. They are of the brooks of the willow archetype. Therefore, again, for review, and I like to repeat things many times because that's what the Torah does, and that's what any good teacher should do. And so that disproves the rabbi's understanding of the four species and supports Nehemiah's understanding of the four species that we spoke about last week in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 15. Yan Yahweh et malach hadover b'devarim tovim v'devarim nechumim. So Yahweh answered this man sitting on the red horse with good and comforting words. Verse 14. Go to half the verse. V'yomer elai hamalach dover bi kra lemor ko amar Yahweh tzevaot. And the man, I'm just going to paraphrase, the man sitting on the red horse, but literally v'yomer elai hamalach dover bi. So the messenger, the angel that was speaking to me, called out kra lemor and saying ko amar Yahweh tzevaot. So says Yahweh of hosts. And I love this, is a famous phrase. I have a great jealousy for Jerusalem and for Zion. Zion is essentially just it's a pet name, or it's another name for Jerusalem. So we have, again, repetition, meaning emphasis, okay? A great jealousy. So I've been jealous with a great jealousy for Jerusalem and for Zion. What does that mean, a great jealousy? In other words, to paraphrase it or to put in straightforward terms, Yahweh is dying to redeem Jerusalem. He has how can we say, he doesn't like the fact that Jerusalem is uninhabited, as it is essentially at this point, that the people of Jerusalem and the people of Judea are in exile, and he has jealousy, he has feelings of loss and betrayal towards Jerusalem, and he is dying to have it re-inhabited, to have it resettled. B'ketzef gadol ani kotzef al hagoyim asher ananim. And I have a great anger. I feel a great anger. I anger a great anger, literally. Al goyim ananim, on the nations that are resting easily. We saw the same phrase, katzaf ketzef gadol, or similar, in the very beginning of this book. Right? Verse 2, katzaf Yahweh al avotechem katzef. Yahweh had great anger, or Yahweh greatly expressed an anger, or angered with great anger towards, or angered with anger towards your forefathers. Again, it's very hard to kind of translate from the Hebrew into and make it make sense in English. But essentially, Yahweh had great anger towards your forefathers. It's that same Hebrew word, or two words, katzaf, ketzef, that means anger. Okay. Literally means foam. So like foaming at the mouth. So in modern Hebrew, whipped cream is katzefet, like foamy cream. That's the idea. It's like Yahweh's foaming at the mouth, foaming out of his mouth, figuratively speaking, of course, against your forefathers. And here with almost exactly that same phrase, that he has that same anger, and I'm foaming at the mouth against the nations that are at peace. So Yahweh is the idea that's being expressed here. Let's finish off the verse, and then we can talk about the idea that's being expressed here. Asher ani katzafti me'at wahem azru le'ra'ah. Because I had some anger. I'm going to translate literally. I had a little anger, but they helped exacerbate it. They helped towards making it worse. So what is all of this saying? Okay? Yahweh is saying he's greatly angered at the nations that he's foaming at the mouth over the nations that are resting at peace. And at the same time, he's very upset, very jealous, very zealous to re-inhabit Jerusalem, because he had some anger, literally a little bit of anger towards Jerusalem, towards the Jews, towards the Judeans, towards the inhabitants of Judea. But they made the situation worse. In other words, I intended to have Jerusalem taken down and have its inhabitants exiled, but they made it worse than I even thought. They were happy to help me out, in other words. They were happy to take it to the next level. That's what Yahweh is saying. So he's mad at the nations for taking his idea, or taking his decision to have Jerusalem conquered by Israel's enemies, by the enemy of the Jews, and we can't call them Jews at this point because this is the kingdom of Judea. But the nations went overboard. So it's almost like if you say to a child, you can have some chocolate, and you're thinking in your mind, okay, he'll take a piece or two of chocolate. Instead, he takes 25 pieces of chocolate and chocolate over his face, and then vomits half an hour later, right? That's the idea. So Yahweh was giving these nations permission to take down Jerusalem, but they went overboard. They were more than happy to help out. That's the idea that's being expressed here. Let me just check in for comments. Alrighty, verse 16. L'chein ko amar Yahweh, shavti liyerushalayim berachamim, beiti yibaneh ba ne'um Yahweh tzevaot, urkav Yinate al Yerushalayim. Okay, I love this verse. I love all of Zechariah. Zechariah is a very powerful prophet, very powerful book. They all are. But this is great stuff. Okay. L'chein komar Yahweh. So therefore says Yahweh, Shavti Yerushalayim, v'rachamim. I shall return, or I have returned to Jerusalem with mercy. Right? Remember Zechariah's. I'm sorry. Was it Zechariah? Let's find it here. Just find it for 1 second. Yeah, right. Right. So the main horseman says to Yahweh, Ad matai lo tirachem et Yerushalayim? How, until when will you not have any mercy on Jerusalem? So this is Yahweh's answer. Okay, a great zealousness, great jealousy towards Jerusalem. I want to resettle it. I intended to give the nations a certain leeway to destroy it, but they went way overboard, and I'm mad at them because they're living in peace, and my city is destroyed. That's essentially what Yahweh is saying. And so now Yahweh answers the man on the horse, the horseman on the red horse, who asked him, how much longer will you not have mercy towards Jerusalem? And now in this verse, he answers, okay, I will return, or I have returned to Jerusalem in mercy. Okay, in other words, the time is now, which is in line with the idea that it's 70 years, right? No, shoham, no. Okay, za'amti, or za'amta zashivim shana. You've been angry for these 70 years. We know that the prophecy was that the Judeans would be exiled for 70 years. So the time is here to rebuild. Beiti yibaneh ba. Beiti yibaneh ba. We see the nikud, we see the dot inside the hay, the dagesh, inside the hay, and that means that it's meant to be aspirated. Ba. Not ba. I'm sorry, I said that a little bit too aspirated. Ba. Okay, so it's a breathing out. In 8, Shoham, I'm going to throw you right out of here. 8, no. You behave yourself, little boy. Right out on the street. Okay. Come here, baby. Come here. Okay. Okay. So in it, the feminine. So in it, feminine, in her. That's what the ba is. And when you have a feminine possessive form in Hebrew, or this is not the possessive, this is the object of the preposition. So when you have the objective prepositional form, or the prepositional objective form, and it's feminine, singular, then it's also going to be with a aspirated a, and that's why the dot is there. It's a technical grammatical point, but it's ba. Okay, so my house shall be built in it. Ne'um Yahweh Tzvaot, declares Yahweh of hosts. V'kav Yinate al Yerushalayim. And literally the line, they're not going to translate this line. Let me just think of the better translation. The string, or I'll explain what it means in a second, but I'll just translate it for now as the line Yinate al Yerushalayim. And the line shall be stretched out upon Jerusalem. Shoham, don't bother, love you. Come here, you. You're going out for a while. Come here, you. You're being very silly. Come here. Look at this. You see all these people know you're being silly now? See what a disgrace you're making of yourself? Go. Okay, so what does this mean? So the line is essentially the surveyor's line. It's a string. Okay, let's see how they translate it. Yeah, they even translate it as surveyor's line. Okay, so I'll tell you, and I think we're going to end in just a minute. I don't think we're going to get to Leviticus 24 today, but that's fine. So I'll tell you that one of my first jobs, while I was in college, my between my freshman and sophomore year in college. During the summer, I worked for 2 years. I'm sorry, for 2 months as working for a land surveying company, and it was one of my favorite jobs ever. I worked in the New York. I grew up in New York City, and I went to school outside of New York City, but I was back in New York City, not in Manhattan, in Queens for the summer. And my father happened to be friends with I can't remember. He was like the building inspector of Queens or something like that. At any rate, he had a position in the government there, and as building inspector or whatever his exact position was, he had contact with a lot of land surveying companies, and so he was able to pull a couple of strings, protexi as we say here in Hebrew, in Israel, and get me a job with a particular land surveying company. And that entire summer, what I did was crawl through backyards, in parks, in building courtyards, everywhere, in construction sites, and we did land surveying. We basically measured stuff up, and that was one of my favorite jobs ever. I wish I'd become a land surveyor. It was really so much fun. I absolutely loved that job. And so one of the things that we did at times was stretch a line. So you would stretch a line. It's called a tape. It was like this big, huge measuring tape. We just called it the tape, and you'd have to start from a certain point, which was a certain already established landmark. It could be a post that was dug or that was pounded into the ground. It could be a nail. I remember we used to call them PK nails. And you'd put it was called a plumb bob. It was like basically a weight with a point at the end, and you'd put it right over the landmark. And this had to be exact, almost like down to the inch. I don't know what the tolerance was, but very exacting. And then from that point, or from that plumb bob, sometimes you didn't need to use the plumb bob, but it doesn't matter. You'd stretch the line in a certain direction to either another landmark or to a certain distance out. And that's the way that boundaries were measured, and still are to this day. Now everything's electronic. Now they use everything's with laser, and I don't even know if they use the chains anymore, the measuring tapes. Yeah, that's what they call them, not the tape, the chains. I don't even know if they use that anymore. They have these automated theodolites. Theodolites are those tripod or the instruments on top of the yellow tripods that you'll see land surveyors using. So now they use laser and God knows what. But back in the day, we were crawling around all over. It was so much fun. It really was. Anyway, that's what's being expressed here. That a line is the line. The surveyor's line is what measures out the boundaries between properties. And why is that significant? So it's significant because that's a sign that Jerusalem is being resettled. When property lines need to be figured out and boundaries, property boundaries, remember there's a mitzvah in the Torah not to move your neighbor's boundary line or boundary stone. When boundaries between properties need to be measured out and marked, that's a sign that Jerusalem is being resettled. And that's exactly what this phrase is referring to. The surveyor's line will be stretched out upon, it says Yerushalayim, but it really means within Yerushalayim. Okay? Let's do one more verse, and then we're going to end. Od, kra, lemor. And furthermore, call out or declare and say. So who's calling out? Where was the calling out again? Where did it start? Find it. So, here. Okay. So, ויאמר אלי המלאך הדובר בי קרא לאמור. Okay, call out, and this is the continuation of that calling out. Od kra, so furthermore, call out and say, or to say. Ko amar Yahweh Tzevaot, so says Yahweh of hosts, Od. Tifutzena, arei, mitov. I'm sorry, arai, mitov. So tafitz, the underlying root is, I believe, Yud Pei Tzadi. Let's look it up. Okay. So it's a two-letter root, basically Pei Tzadi. So Od Tifutzena Arai Mitov. So it means spread out, or spread out. So od tiputzena arai mitov. So also call out and say, so says Yahweh of hosts, soon or furthermore or moreover, my cities will be spread out from goodness or in goodness. Okay, in other words, Jerusalem, and by extension, the cities of Judea will spread out again. They'll be repopulated, and their boundaries will spread out, like it's happening right here in the city I live in the Golan Heights, which I'm not too happy about, but that's another story. Okay, Wanicham Yahweh od et Zion ubachar od b'Yerushalayim, and Yahweh will once again have mercy, not nicham, will comfort Zion, and will choose once again Jerusalem, and will choose Jerusalem once again. Okay? Should we do the rest of chapter 4? Let me see. I think we're going to stop here. Because this is a different prophecy. Okay, so we're going to stop here. Let me just make a note of it for myself. Okay, that's all. Just made a note for next week. So we're going to stop here. Let's do just to sum up here. Let's again do a little bit of Robert Alter with his translation and commentary. So we'll start here. And the Lord's messenger answered and said, O Lord of armies, how long will you show no mercy to Jerusalem and to the towns of Judah, against which you have been wrathful now 70 years? And the Lord answered the messenger who was speaking to me good words and comforting words. And the messenger who was speaking to me said to me, call out, saying, thus said the Lord of armies, I've been greatly zealous for Jerusalem and for Zion. Right? So it's Zechariah himself who the angel is telling to call out. And remember, this is all part of a vision. It's not that Zechariah is calling out to the people. I don't think that's the context here. It's just in this vision, Zechariah is now taking part. He's part of the action. And I'm very greatly furious. That's the way Robert Alter translates that repetition of katzaf and ketzef, right? I have been furious with great fury. He translates it as I'm very greatly furious, which is a fine translation, right? He's expressing that repetition, meaning emphasis, with the nations resting quiet, as I was but a little furious, yet they piled on the harm. Therefore, thus says the Lord, thus says Yahweh, I have turned back in mercy to Jerusalem, and a building line shall be stretched over Jerusalem. My house shall be built in her. Call out again, saying, thus says the Lord of armies, again shall my towns spread out from bounty. Bounty meaning, the bounty of like the harvest, right? From abundance. And again shall Yahweh comfort Zion, and again shall he choose Jerusalem. So let's get a little commentary on that, and then we're going to end. So we'll start in verse 7. So this is on the 24th day of the 11th month. This is Zechariah's second prophecy. This is just 2 months after the foundation work for the temple had begun, with Haggai's exhortations to Zerubbabel and Joshua. We'll get to that when we get to the book of Haggai. I saw at night and look. So this is the beginning of the prophecy of the red horseman, or the horseman on the red horse. But the word dream does not appear. This is manifestly a dream vision using the formulaic language that reports the beginning of the dream. Exactly, right? It's at night. So that's what we're saying. This didn't actually happen. This was in a dream or in a vision. A bay horse, while this is the realistic color for horse, the Hebrew Adom could also, read this before, okay? Standing among the myrtles that are there by the deep. These details may be evocative, but their purpose is mystifying. Okay? The messenger, now the mysterious man on the bay horse, is explicitly identified as the divine messenger, right? So he's the protagonist, essentially. He's the malach. The book of Daniel will use man in this same sense, okay? To go about the earth. The horses then are themselves agents of the divine, sent to see what is happening on earth. In a moment they will speak, delivering their reconnaissance report. And where else do we see this? In the beginning of the book of Job, where the Satan, does not have a proper name named Satan, he is the adversary, right? He's a particular angel, is told to go throughout the earth. It's right at the beginning of the book of Job. As I was a little bit furious, but they piled on the harm. God had used them as an instrument to punish Israel, but in their vicious treatment of the conquered people, they exceeded all limits. The literal sense of they piled on harm is they helped for harm or for evil. The building line, these were lines used to assure the straight rectangular contours of the building. So I'm not so sure about that because in other places it's translated as surveyor's lines. So fine. Okay. As we spoke about. And that's it. So we're up to now Zechariah chapter 18. I'm sorry, Zechariah chapter 1, verse 18. We'll do it next time. We're not going to have a chance to get into Leviticus 24. That's okay. No biggie. We'll do it next week, hopefully. And so let's sum up what we learned about today. We spoke about Anan ben David, how he was not explicitly a Karaite, but he's considered the nominal founder of the Karaite movement. His followers were called Ananites. He lived in the 700s in the 8th century. Let's go back to him for a second. Okay. He lived in the 8th century, and he essentially, and there's a legend made up about him that he decided to oppose the rabbis, because he was snubbed for the job of exilarch, and that position went to his brother Hassan. And therefore, he decided to make up his own his own sectarian sect, breakaway religion as revenge. We also saw that this is a made-up story. This fits the archetype, typical background story often used of heretics. So it never happened. It's just a polemic against a later polemic against the Karaites by saying that the nominal founder of the Karaite movement wasn't really, idealistically motivated, that he had a vendetta. He had what's the phrase I'm looking for? He had a bone to pick against the caliphate or against the rabbis that had chosen his brother over him. And we saw that is not true. This is just a polemic. It's a made-up story to put the Karaites in a bad light. Anyway, he did write a book called Sefer Mitzvot, parts of which still exist, published in 770, where he essentially made his own interpretations of the Torah, some of which are in line with traditional Karaism, some of which are in line with our movement, the Neo-Karaite, as we're often called from the outside, or the Chozrim B'Tanach movement, and some of which are not. So, of course, I don't believe that all fire should go out before the Shabbat starts. I don't believe that we should stay in our house during the Shabbat and a whole bunch of other things. But there was some overlap we saw, such as the fact that Shavuot falls on a Sunday. But that is Anan ben David. So he is the nominal founder. So whenever you speak to somebody and you identify yourself as a Karaite, they can say, oh, the founder of Karaism only became a Karaite. He only opposed the rabbis because he didn't get the job. He was snubbed for the job of exilarch. And then you could respond and say two things. Number one, Anan was not the founder of the Karaites. He was the nominal founder of the Karaites. In other words, he was one of the first major anti-rabbinical movements of his time. And he was not snubbed for the job of exilarch. That's a made-up story by the rabbis to make the Karaites look bad. Okay. Then we went on to the book of Zechariah, and we saw his various prophecies, or two of his first prophecies, occurring in the time of Darius, I believe it's Darius II. Yahweh has been mad at your forefathers, so don't repeat their evil deeds. Come back to me, and I shall come back to you, as we saw also echoing that same phrase in Malachi chapter 3, I guess it was. I don't remember now. I think it was 3 we said. And then the vision of the horsemen by the ravine or by the riverbed among the myrtle bushes that go out and see that the nations are living at peace, and that makes Yahweh zealous for Jerusalem because Jerusalem is destroyed and the other nations are living at peace. And basically Zechariah or the horseman announces through Zechariah, again, all in a nighttime vision. Not Zechariah didn't call out to the people as did in this case, as in other cases or as other prophets do. It's all in a vision that the time for Yahweh, the time for the 70-year exile that had been prophesied before the destruction of Jerusalem, that time is over, and Yahweh is once again turning his face towards Jerusalem, and showing mercy and rebuilding Jerusalem. And that is a summary of what we learned today. Any questions, any comments before we conclude? Anybody? Going once? Going twice? Questions or comments, anybody? Okay, if not, then I'm going to end the study for today. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you'll join us again next week. So we do this Shabbat study every week. The best way to stay updated about this and any other studies that we're going to do is to join our WhatsApp group. We have a WhatsApp group for announcements. I'll post the link. Okay, you can follow it. You just have to copy and paste it out of the comments or something like that. This is a wahad link. It's one heck of a link, but I'll put it on the screen anyway. Okay, or you can just text me on WhatsApp or in any of the other ways. You can get in contact with me and ask to be added to the group, and I will add you to the group. So that's the best way to get announcements about when our future studies are coming up or any other announcements that the World Alliance of Qara'im has to make on this WhatsApp group. Okay, you can also check our various other outlets, our Facebook page, our Facebook group. They're usually going to be in there. Okay, and if you want to join the World Alliance of Qara'im, please do so at the following link. So it's patreon.com/join/Karaite Insights. I'm going to post it here. This also, as I mentioned, helps us raise money for, we have so many plans. And the first and foremost is setting up a community. We already have a community forming. We are having now weekly meetings here in Katsrin, in the Golan Heights, in Israel. So this is already happening. So if you want to join our community, a live Karaite community, please do. Here in Israel, but to become a member of the online community, which gives a whole bunch of different benefits and helps us raise a budget for all of these projects we have. Once again, that's patreon.com/join/Karaite Insights. Okay, so with that, I'm going to end the study. Thank you all for joining us. We'll go out with some music as usual. And we will see again, Be'ezrat Yahweh, with the help of Yahweh, next week. I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom or a Shavua Tov, depending where you are in the world. And see you guys again very soon. Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.
ילדי הטוב והרע, אל תירא ואל תפחד, my son. I have nothing I can give but this chance that you may live. I pray we'll meet again if he will deliver us. Hush now, my baby, be still, love, don't cry. Sleep as you're rocked by the stream. Sleep and remember my last lullaby. So I'll be with you when you dream. River, oh river, flow gently for me. Such precious cargo you bear. Do you know somewhere he can live free? River, deliver him there. Mother, you're safe now, and safe may you stay. For I have a prayer just for you. Grow, baby brother, come back someday. Come and deliver us too.